Odyssey, written and directed by the legendary Christopher Nolan, based on Homer's ancient Greek epic. The film follows Odysseus, played by Matt Damon, as he struggles to find his way home to Ithaca after the Trojan War. His journey is far from simple, as he encounters mythical creatures, dangerous seas, powerful gods, seductive figures, and enemies who threaten everything he is trying to return to. What makes Nolan's adaptation particularly extraordinary is its enormous cinematic scale. The Odyssey was shot across multiple international locations and is the first film ever shot entirely with IMAX cameras, fulfilling one of Nolan's long-standing filmmaking ambitions. The movie also features an extraordinary ensemble cast, including Tom Holland as Telemachus, Anne Hathaway as Penelope, Zendaya as Athena, Robert Pattinson as Antinous, Lupita Nyong'o, and Charlize Theron as Calypso. The film was released in theaters on July 17, 2026, and has already attracted enormous attention for its spectacular visuals, practical filmmaking, mythological world-building, and Nolan's distinctive storytelling style. So in today's video, we are going deep into the Odyssey, from its story, genre, cast, and production history to its inspiration, filming locations, trailer characters, hidden details, memorable scenes, critical reception, and box office performance. Stay with us until the end, because this is not simply another movie. It is Christopher Nolan's attempt to bring one of humanity's greatest ancient stories to the biggest possible screen. What this video covers. In this video, we will take an in-depth look at Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, 2026, exploring everything you need to know about this highly anticipated epic. We will begin with the movie overview, genre, release date, runtime, production companies, director, writers, and producers, before moving into the story and the inspiration behind Nolan's adaptation of Homer's legendary epic. We will also explore the movie's massive production history, filming locations, practical effects, IMAX technology, behind-the-scenes facts, and the challenges involved in bringing ancient Greek mythology to modern cinema. After that, we will break down the official trailer, examine the major characters and performances, and discuss the development of Odysseus, Penelope, Telemachus, Athena, and the other important figures. Finally, we will look at the movie's best scenes, hidden details and Easter eggs, memorable moments, positive and negative aspects, critics' reviews, audience response, budget and box office performance, before giving you our final verdict. So stay with us as we uncover the world of the Odyssey and find out whether Christopher Nolan has succeeded in turning Homer's timeless journey into a truly unforgettable cinematic experience. Movie overview. The Odyssey, 2026, is a large-scale mythic action epic written and directed by acclaimed filmmaker Christopher Nolan. Based on Homer's ancient Greek epic poem, The Odyssey, the film follows Odysseus, played by Matt Damon, during his extraordinarily difficult journey home to Ithaca away. The movie features an exceptionally star-studded ensemble cast, including Tom Holland, Anne Hathaway, Robert Pattinson, Lupita Nyong'o, Zendaya, and Charlize Theron, alongside Matt Damon. Each character is connected to the larger, mythological journey, creating a story that moves between warfare, adventure, mythology, family, love, temptation, and survival. One of the film's most remarkable aspects is its visual, scale, and filmmaking technology. The Odyssey was shot entirely with IMAX film cameras, making it the first movie to be photographed completely using IMAX film cameras. Nolan has used the format to capture enormous landscapes, large-scale action, and the mythological world with an immersive cinematic presentation. In selected IMAX 70mm locations, the film can be presented in the expanded 1.43.1 aspect ratio, allowing audiences to experience more of the image vertically. The film also represents Nolan's return to an epic, historical and mythological setting after his previous large-scale productions. Rather than treating Homer's story as a simple ancient adventure, the movie attempts to bring its themes of homecoming, loyalty, temptation, sacrifice, identity, and perseverance to a modern cinematic audience while maintaining the grandeur of the original mythology. Produced by Emma Thomas and Christopher Nolan through their production company Syncope, with Thomas Hayslip serving as executive producer, the film combines Nolan's filmmaking style with one of the oldest and most influential stories in Western literature. The Odyssey opened in theaters worldwide on July 17, 2026, and is designed as a major theatrical experience, particularly in premium large formats and IMAX. Overall, the Odyssey is more than a traditional adventure movie. It is an ambitious cinematic interpretation of one, man's extraordinary struggle to return home. Combining ancient mythology, spectacular action, emotional storytelling, and cutting-edge large-format filmmaking. With Christopher Nolan behind the camera and a remarkable ensemble cast in front of it, the movie aims to transform Homer's timeless epic into a massive modern cinematic experience. Movie genre. The Odyssey 2026 is primarily a mythological epic, action-adventure, and historical fantasy film, with strong elements of drama, war, and adventure. Directed by Christopher Nolan, the movie adapts Homer's ancient Greek epic, The Odyssey, so its genre is naturally broader than that of a conventional action movie. It combines large-scale battles, mythical creatures, ancient civilizations, emotional family drama, and a hero's long journey home. The mythological element is at the heart of the film. The story takes place in the world of ancient Greek mythology, where gods, monsters, supernatural forces, and legendary heroes exist alongside ordinary human beings. Odysseus' journey exposes him to extraordinary dangers and forces him to confront powers far beyond his control. The movie is also a major action-adventure epic. Odysseus must survive battles, storms, dangerous encounters, and various obstacles while attempting to return to Ithaca. Christopher Nolan's filmmaking style gives these sequences enormous scale, with practical production techniques and IMAX cinematography designed to make the journey feel physically immersive. There is also a strong historical and war element because the story begins after the Trojan War. Odysseus is returning from years of warfare, and the consequences of that conflict continue to affect his life and relationships. However, the movie should not be considered a purely historical film because Homer's story contains extensive mythology and supernatural elements. At its emotional core, The Odyssey is also a drama about family and homecoming. Odysseus' desire to return to his wife, Penelope, and son Telemachus gives his enormous journey a personal purpose. His struggle is therefore not simply about survival. It is about reclaiming his identity, family, and home after years of war and hardship. The film can also be described as a heroic journey. Odysseus faces one challenge after another, and each experience tests his intelligence, courage, loyalty, and ability to overcome temptation. This structure makes the movie both an ancient myth and a timeless story about human perseverance. Main genres. Mythological epic, based on one of the greatest works of ancient Greek mythology. Action-adventure, featuring battles, dangerous voyages, monsters, and spectacular encounters. Historical epic, rooted in the world surrounding the Trojan War and ancient Greece. Fantasies incorporating gods, supernatural forces, mythical creatures, and legendary events. Drama, focusing on Odysseus' relationship with Penelope and Telemachus. War, connected to the aftermath of the Trojan War and Odysseus' experiences as a warrior. Overall, The Odyssey is best described as a grand mythological action-adventure epic with historical, fantasy, war, and dramatic elements. Its central theme is not simply defeating enemies, but the struggle to return home after experiencing war, temptation, loss, and unimaginable hardship. The Odyssey 2026 was officially released in cinemas worldwide on July 17, 2026. The film was released by Universal Pictures and was designed as a major theatrical event, particularly for IMAX audiences. The official movie information confirms that July 17 was the worldwide theatrical release date. The release was especially significant because The Odyssey became the first film shot entirely with IMAX film cameras, making its theatrical presentation a major part of the movie's appeal. Christopher Nolan specifically designed the film for the largest possible screens, allowing audiences to experience its massive landscapes, battles, ships, and mythological sequences on an enormous scale. The film's release date also placed it in the middle of the 2026 summer movie season, giving Nolan and Universal an opportunity to present the movie as a major global cinematic event rather than a conventional historical or fantasy film. The Odyssey 2026 has a reported runtime of approximately 2 hours and 39 minutes, or 159 minutes, making it one of the longer major releases of 2026. The extended running time is understandable given the enormous scope of Christopher Nolan's adaptation of Homer's ancient epic. The original story follows Odysseus through a long and dangerous journey filled with wars, storms, mythical creatures, gods, temptations, and encounters with extraordinary characters. A shorter runtime would have made it difficult to give adequate attention to such a vast narrative. The film's long duration also gives Nolan enough space to develop Odysseus as a character rather than presenting him simply as a legendary warrior. His journey is not only physical but also emotional and psychological. He must survive countless dangers while remaining determined to return to Ithaca, his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus. The additional screen time allows the movie to explore themes of loyalty, sacrifice, temptation, perseverance, family, identity, and the meaning of home. Another reason the runtime is significant is the movie's enormous cinematic scale. The Odyssey features large-scale battles, ancient cities, sea voyages, ships, mythical creatures, supernatural encounters, and spectacular landscapes. Christopher Nolan has also designed the film as an immersive theatrical experience, shooting it entirely with IMAX film cameras. This means that many sequences are intended to be experienced on a huge screen, where the expansive imagery can fully convey the scale of Odysseus's journey. The extended runtime also allows the story to move through different stages of Odysseus's adventure without making the transitions feel excessively rushed. The film can establish the aftermath of the Trojan War, follow Odysseus across dangerous seas, introduce the mythical world surrounding his journey, and eventually bring the narrative back to the emotional question. At the heart of the story, will Odysseus finally make it home? For audiences, a runtime of nearly 2 hours and 40 minutes means the Odyssey is designed to be experienced as a full-scale cinematic epic rather than a conventional action movie. It gives the filmmakers the opportunity to balance spectacular action with quieter, emotional moments, character development, mythology, and dramatic storytelling. In short, the reported runtime is approximately 159 minutes, or 2 hours and 39 minutes, providing Christopher Nolan with enough cinematic space to transform Homer's enormous epic into a detailed, visually ambitious, and emotionally powerful theatrical experience. The Odyssey 2026 is produced primarily by Syncope, the production company founded by Christopher Nolan and Emma Thomas. Syncope has been behind many of Nolan's major films, including the Dark Knight trilogy, Inception, Interstellar, Dunkirk, Tenet, and Oppenheimer. For the Odyssey, the company once again provides Nolan with the creative and production framework to develop an ambitious, large-scale project based on Homer's ancient epic. The film is also being produced in collaboration with Universal Pictures, which is responsible for financing and distributing the movie internationally. Universal's involvement is particularly significant because the Odyssey is designed as a major global theatrical event, requiring substantial resources for its extensive international production, enormous sets, practical effects, large cast, and IMAX cinematography. Christopher Nolan and Emma Thomas serve as the principal producers through Syncope. Their long-standing partnership is important because Thomas has produced almost all of Nolan's major films, while Nolan is responsible for writing and directing The Odyssey. This allows the project to maintain a consistent creative vision from screenplay, development through filming and post-production. The production is also supported by Atlas Entertainment, with Charles Roven involved as a producer. Roven has extensive experience producing large-scale Hollywood projects, including Christopher Nolan's earlier films and major franchises. His involvement adds further production expertise to a project that requires extensive international coordination. What makes the production particularly ambitious is the decision to shoot the entire movie using IMAX film cameras. According to Universal and IMAX, The Odyssey is the first feature film shot entirely with IMAX film cameras, representing a major technical achievement. This required specialized equipment and production planning because shooting on IMAX film is considerably more demanding than conventional digital filmmaking. The production also took place across several countries and environments to create the ancient Mediterranean world of the story. Instead of relying entirely on computer-generated backgrounds, Nolan's team used real locations, practical sets, ships, costumes, large-scale physical environments, and practical filmmaking techniques wherever possible. This approach is consistent with Nolan's preference for creating tangible environments that actors can physically interact with. Overall, the production of The Odyssey brings together Syncope, Universal Pictures, and Atlas Entertainment, supported by an experienced team led by Christopher Nolan, Emma Thomas, and Charles Roven. With its enormous international production, practical filmmaking approach, and complete reliance on IMAX film cameras, the movie represents one of the most technically ambitious productions of Nolan's career. Production companies Syncope, Universal Pictures, and Atlas Entertainment Principal producers Christopher Nolan, Emma Thomas, and Charles Roven. Christopher Nolan is the writer and director of the Odyssey 2026 and is widely regarded as one of the most influential filmmakers of contemporary cinema. Known for combining ambitious storytelling with innovative filmmaking techniques, Nolan has built a reputation for creating large-scale movies that explore complex ideas such as time, memory, identity, morality, sacrifice, and human perseverance. His distinctive approach makes him particularly well-suited to adapting a legendary story as expansive as Homer's The Odyssey. Nolan began attracting international attention with films such as Memento, which demonstrated his interest in fragmented narratives and psychological storytelling. He later became a major Hollywood filmmaker through The Dark Knight, followed by ambitious original projects including Inception, Interstellar, Dunkirk, and Tenet. His 2023 film, Oppenheimer, became both a critical and commercial success and earned Nolan his first Academy Award for Best Director. One of Nolan's defining characteristics is his preference for practical filmmaking and large-format photography. Rather than depending entirely on computer-generated imagery, he frequently attempts to create physical environments, real sets, practical effects, and large-scale sequences whenever possible. This filmmaking philosophy is especially important for The Odyssey, where Nolan wanted the ancient world to feel tangible and immersive. For The Odyssey, Nolan takes on the enormous challenge of translating Homer's ancient Greek epic into a modern cinematic experience. The story gives him the opportunity to combine many of his filmmaking interests, massive action sequences, psychological conflict, complicated human relationships, mythology, and a protagonist undertaking an extraordinary journey. Nolan has also pushed the boundaries of theatrical presentation throughout his career. With The Odyssey, he went even further by shooting the entire film with IMAX film cameras, making it the first feature to do so. This decision reflects his belief that large-format cinema should be experienced on the biggest possible screen. The enormous landscapes, ships, battles, and mythological encounters are therefore designed not merely to tell the story, but to create a powerful theatrical experience. Another important feature of Nolan's directing style is his ability to combine spectacle with emotional storytelling. Even when his films involve enormous action sequences, he usually places an individual human struggle at the center. In The Odyssey, that struggle is Odysseus' determination to return home after years of war, danger, temptation, and loss. Overall, Christopher Nolan's involvement makes The Odyssey much more than a conventional adaptation of an ancient poem. His reputation for ambitious storytelling, practical effects, large-format cinematography, complex characters, and immersive theatrical filmmaking has turned the project into one of the most anticipated epic productions of 2026. Director Christopher Nolan. Role director and screenwriter. Known for Memento, The Dark Knight, Inception, Interstellar, Dunkirk, Tenet, and Oppenheimer, the screenplay for The Odyssey 2026 was written by Christopher Nolan, who also serves as the film's director. Instead of creating an entirely new story, Nolan is adapting Homer's ancient Greek epic poem, The Odyssey, one of the foundational works of Western literature.
The original poem follows Odysseus, the king of Ithaca,
as he attempts to return home after the Trojan War, facing years of dangerous voyages, mythical creatures, supernatural forces, and personal trials along the way. Nolan's biggest challenge as a screenwriter is transforming a thousands of years old epic poem into a modern feature film screenplay without losing the essence of Homer's story. The original epic contains numerous episodes and characters, so the screenplay has to select and organize these events into a coherent cinematic narrative. This allows Nolan to focus on the central themes of homecoming: loyalty, courage, temptation, sacrifice, identity, and perseverance, while presenting the mythology in a way that contemporary audiences can understand. The screenplay also gives greater importance to the emotional dimension of Odysseus' journey. His goal is not simply to survive monsters and supernatural dangers. He desperately wants to return to Penelope and his son Telemachus. This family connection provides the emotional motivation behind his long journey and gives the spectacular adventure a human core. Nolan's previous screenwriting style is also relevant here. His films frequently combine large-scale spectacle with complex characters and deeper philosophical ideas. In The Odyssey, this approach allows the legendary adventures of Odysseus to function not merely as action sequences, but as challenges that test his intelligence, morality, loyalty, and ability to resist temptation. Another important feature of the screenplay is the balance between mythology and realism. The story contains gods, monsters, legendary creatures, and supernatural events, yet Nolan's filmmaking approach aims to make these extraordinary elements feel physically convincing. This is consistent with his preference for practical filmmaking and tangible environments. The screenplay therefore has to serve two purposes at the same time. Respect the spirit of Homer's original epic while creating a cinematic narrative that works for a modern audience. Nolan's adaptation brings together ancient mythology, war, adventure, family drama, psychological conflict, and spectacular action into one continuous journey. Ultimately, the writing of the Odyssey is central to the movie's ambition. Christopher Nolan is not simply retelling an ancient story. He is reimagining one of the world's most famous epics for modern cinema. His screenplay provides the foundation for a film that aims to combine the timeless themes of Homer with Nolan's own distinctive style of storytelling. Writer and screenplay, Christopher Nolan. Based on Homer's The Odyssey. Central character, Odysseus. Main themes, homecoming, loyalty, sacrifice, family, temptation, courage, identity, and perseverance. The Odyssey 2026 is produced by Christopher Nolan and Emma Thomas, working through their production company Syncope, with Charles Roven also serving as a producer. The combination brings together some of Hollywood as most experienced producers of large-scale films, particularly because Nolan and Thomas have collaborated on many of Nolan's most important projects. Their involvement ensures that the film maintains a consistent creative vision from the screenplay and pre-production stages through filming and post-production. Christopher Nolan is not only the director and screenwriter, but also one of the film's principal producers. This gives him significant creative involvement in the entire production process. Nolan has traditionally been closely involved in the technical and artistic decisions surrounding his films, including cinematography, practical effects, editing, sound, and theatrical presentation. For The Odyssey, his producer role is particularly important because the movie requires enormous logistical coordination and extensive international production. Emma Thomas, Nolan's longtime producing partner and wife, is another central figure behind the film. Through Syncope, she has produced many of Nolan's major projects, including The Dark Knight, Inception, Interstellar, Dunkirk, Tenet, and Oppenheimer. Her experience in managing complex productions is particularly valuable for a project as ambitious as The Odyssey, which involves a huge cast, international filming, elaborate sets, practical effects, and specialized IMAX photography. Charles Roven also serves as a producer and brings decades of experience in producing major Hollywood blockbusters. He previously worked with Nolan on the Dark Knight trilogy, Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, Justice League, and Oppenheimer. His experience with large-scale productions helps provide the logistical and organizational expertise necessary for a movie of this magnitude. The producers also worked closely with Universal Pictures, which is behind the film's worldwide theatrical distribution. Universal's involvement is particularly significant because The Odyssey is being positioned as a major global theatrical event, with an emphasis on IMAX and other premium large-format presentations. One of the producers' biggest challenges was managing the film's unprecedented IMAX production. The Odyssey was shot entirely with IMAX film cameras, making it the first feature film to be photographed completely in this format. This required specialized equipment, careful planning, and significant logistical coordination. Because IMAX film production is more demanding than conventional digital filmmaking, the production team also had to coordinate filming across multiple countries and environments to recreate the ancient Mediterranean world. From large-scale sets and practical effects to ships, costumes, locations, and massive action sequences, the producers were responsible for bringing together the many departments required to create Nolan's vision. Overall, the producers play a crucial role in transforming The Odyssey from an ambitious screenplay into a massive cinematic production. With Christopher Nolan, Emma Thomas, and Charles Roven leading the production alongside Universal Pictures, the film combines creative control, extensive industry experience, and the financial and logistical resources required for a modern epic. The Odyssey 2026 was made because Christopher Nolan had a long-standing personal connection with Homer's epic and saw an opportunity to bring the ancient story to modern audiences on a scale that earlier filmmakers could not achieve. Nolan has said that he had known the Odyssey since childhood, but returning to the story later in life gave him a different perspective. He became particularly interested in its themes of love, loss, family, war, revenge, coming of age, and the search for home. He even described the epic as a foundational story behind many of the themes he has explored throughout his own filmmaking career. Another major reason was the gap Nolan saw in modern cinema. Although the Odyssey is one of the most influential stories in Western literature, Nolan believed that it had never received a major, modern-scale cinematic adaptation capable of fully realizing its mythological world. He specifically saw an opportunity to bring the story's monsters, gods, ancient landscapes, battles, ships, and supernatural environments to the screen. Using filmmaking technology that was not available to earlier generations, Nolan also wanted to make the story accessible to people who had never read Homer's poem. The original epic was created for an audience that already knew the mythology, so it does not always provide the kind of introductions and explanations that a modern film requires. Nolan therefore restructured parts of the story, added cinematic setups, removed repetitions, and used contemporary dialogue so that both longtime fans and newcomers could follow the journey. There was also a personal filmmaking ambition behind the project. After the extraordinary success of Oppenheimer, Nolan had the opportunity to make a passion project on a scale that would have been difficult to finance previously. He has openly acknowledged that Oppenheimer's success helped make the Odyssey possible. The project gave him the freedom and resources to attempt something extraordinarily ambitious. A $250 million epic filmed across 6 countries and entirely on IMAX film. Finally, Nolan wanted audiences to experience the Odyssey as a true theatrical spectacle rather than simply another streaming era historical drama. He used real locations, real ships, practical environments, and specially developed IMAX equipment to make the ancient world feel tangible and immersive. His goal was not simply to educate audiences about Homer, but, as he explained, to entertain them while making the ancient story feel fresh and modern. In short, the Odyssey was made because Nolan saw a rare opportunity to combine a story that has fascinated him since childhood with modern filmmaking technology. He wanted to take one of humanity's oldest stories about a man's struggle to return home and transform it into a massive, emotionally powerful, and visually immersive cinematic experience for a new generation. The biggest inspiration behind the Odyssey 2026 is, of course, Homer's ancient Greek epic, the Odyssey, but Christopher Nolan's adaptation is also shaped by his own lifelong relationship with the story. Nolan has said that he first became familiar with the epic as a child, but reading it again as a middle-aged filmmaker gave him a completely different perspective. He became especially interested in its themes of love, loss, family, war, revenge, coming of age, and the longing for home. Nolan has even described the poem as a foundational text for many of the ideas he has explored throughout his career. Another major inspiration was the opportunity to bring Homer's world to the screen on a scale that had never really been attempted before. Nolan felt there was an important gap in modern cinema. Despite the enormous influence of the Odyssey, there had not been a major contemporary epic adaptation that fully embraced its mythological world, enormous adventures, and spectacular possibilities. He specifically saw an opportunity to create the kind of large-scale cinematic experience that earlier filmmakers could not achieve. Nolan's earlier connection with Troy also played an important role. In the early 2000s, he was briefly considered to direct the 2004 film Troy, which was ultimately directed by Wolfgang Petersen. While thinking about that project, Nolan developed a striking visual idea involving the Trojan horse lying in the sand. Although he did not make Troy, the image stayed with him for years, and he eventually incorporated a version of that idea into the Odyssey. The filmmaker was also inspired by the work of legendary special effects artist Ray Harryhausen, whose classic mythology films influenced Nolan's imagination when he was growing up. Harryhausen's ability to make mythical creatures feel physically present helped shape Nolan's desire to create a world where the supernatural feels tangible and believable rather than purely computer-generated. Interestingly, Nolan also drew inspiration from George Lucas's Star Wars. The opening, Words of the Odyssey were influenced by the way Star Wars immediately establishes the rules and atmosphere of its fictional universe. Nolan wanted audiences to understand from the beginning that they were entering a world where strange and apparently magical things could happen, while still maintaining a grounded, realistic tone. Another important influence was the structure of Homer's original poem itself. Nolan was fascinated by the fact that the Odyssey uses stories within stories, flashbacks and different perspectives, elements that resemble the nonlinear storytelling techniques he has explored in films such as Memento, Inception, and Oppenheimer. Rather than seeing the ancient structure as outdated, Nolan found it surprisingly modern and exciting. The film was also inspired by Nolan's desire to make the ancient story emotionally accessible to a modern audience. Instead of presenting Odysseus merely as a legendary warrior, Nolan focuses heavily on his humanity, his relationship with Penelope, his bond with Telemachus, the consequences of war, and his overwhelming desire to return home. This gives the ancient hero a more personal and psychologically complex dimension. Overall, the Odyssey is inspired by a combination of Homer's timeless epic, Nolan's childhood fascination with mythology, his earlier experience with Troy, Ray Harryhausen's creature filmmaking, Star Wars world-building, and Nolan's own recurring interest in family, war, memory, love, and homecoming. The result is an attempt to take one of the oldest stories ever told and present it through the visual, language, and emotional perspective of modern cinema. The development of the Odyssey 2026 began shortly after Christopher Nolan completed Oppenheimer. After the enormous critical and commercial success of Oppenheimer, Nolan began developing his next project in 2024, eventually deciding to adapt Homer's legendary epic, The Odyssey. He wrote the screenplay himself, and once again partnered with his wife and longtime producing collaborator, Emma Thomas, through their production company, Syncope. The project was developed with Universal Pictures. Continuing Nolan's relationship with the studio after Oppenheimer, one of the most ambitious decisions came very early in production. Nolan wanted to make the film feel physically real rather than completely dependent on digital effects. His goal was to take audiences into the actual environments of Odysseus's journey onto real seas, into real landscapes, and into enormous physical sets. This philosophy shaped almost every part of the production, from location scouting to the construction of practical environments and the use of real ships. The casting process began during late 2024 and continued into early 2025. Matt Damon was ultimately chosen to portray Odysseus, while the enormous ensemble included Tom Holland, Anne Hathaway, Zendaya, Robert Pattinson, Lupita Nyong'o, and Charlize Theron. Several important members of Nolan's regular filmmaking team also returned, including cinematographer Hoyte van Hoytema, composer Ludwig Göransson, and costume designer Ellen Morojnik. Principal photography officially began on February 25, 2025 in Morocco, where locations including Ait Ben Haddou were used to represent the ancient world. The production then moved across several countries, including Greece, Italy, Iceland, Scotland, and Malta, allowing Nolan to capture dramatically different landscapes for the various stages of Odysseus's journey. Universal's behind the scenes material emphasizes that the crew was moving between countries every few weeks, giving the production a genuine sense of an enormous journey. Perhaps the most remarkable technical achievement was Nolan's decision to shoot the entire feature on IMAX film cameras. Traditional IMAX cameras were too large and noisy for many intimate dialogue scenes, so Nolan worked with IMAX to develop a smaller and quieter camera system that could be used throughout the production. This allowed him to combine the enormous scale of IMAX with quieter, character-driven scenes. The production also relied heavily on practical effects. Nolan wanted mythical elements to have a physical presence on set, rather than making the actors perform entirely against green screens. This approach was particularly important for sequences involving creatures and ancient environments. The production used real locations, physical sets, practical effects, and large-scale props to create a tangible version of Homer's world. After approximately 6 months of principal photography, filming concluded on August 8, 2025. The completed film was then prepared for its worldwide theatrical release, with Universal and IMAX placing particular emphasis on the film's large-format presentation. The Odyssey eventually opened internationally on July 17, 2026. What makes the production history especially remarkable is the sheer scale of the undertaking. The film combined international location shooting, practical filmmaking, a massive ensemble cast, real-world environments, newly developed IMAX technology, and Nolan's preference for physical production. The result was intended not simply to recreate Homer's story, but to make audiences feel as though they were physically traveling alongside Odysseus. In short, the Odyssey evolved from Nolan's desire to adapt one of the world's oldest epics into an unprecedented, modern cinematic experience. From its development in 2024 to its 6-month international shoot in 2025, almost every production decision was designed around one objective: to make Homer's mythical world feel as vast, physical, and believable as possible. On the biggest theatrical screens, the Odyssey 2026 was filmed across an extraordinary range of real-world locations, with Christopher Nolan and production designer Ruth de Jong deliberately searching for landscapes that could make Homer's mythological world feel physical, authentic, and believable. Principal photography lasted about 91 days, from February to August 2025, and the production traveled across multiple countries rather than relying heavily on artificial studio environments. One of the most important filming countries was Greece, which naturally provided the perfect environment for Homer's epic. This approach helped create the feeling that Odysseus was genuinely traveling through an enormous and unpredictable world. In short, the major filming locations included Greece, Italy, Morocco, Scotland, Iceland, and additional production work in Malta and Los Angeles. From the ancient-looking architecture of Morocco to the Mediterranean islands of Italy and Greece, and the harsh landscapes of Iceland and Scotland, every location was carefully selected to make the Odyssey feel like a real journey through a mythical ancient world rather than a digitally manufactured fantasy. The Odyssey 2026 is built around a large ensemble of mythological and human characters. But at the heart of the story is Odysseus, a warrior who has spent years fighting in the Trojan War and now faces an even more difficult challenge: finding his way home. Christopher Nolan's adaptation gives these characters more emotional and psychological depth while retaining the legendary qualities of Homer's original epic. Odysseus, played by Matt Damon, is the central character and the emotional core of the movie. He is not simply portrayed as a powerful warrior. He is an intelligent, strategic, ambitious, and deeply flawed man whose greatest desire is to return home to his family. His defining quality is his cunning intelligence. Odysseus frequently survives situations that cannot be overcome through physical strength alone. His encounters with enemies and supernatural forces require him to think strategically, manipulate circumstances, and make difficult decisions. However, his intelligence can also become a weakness. His pride and confidence sometimes place him in greater danger. The character therefore represents a complicated combination of courage and arrogance. His journey forces him to learn that intelligence alone cannot protect him from every consequence of his decisions. Most importantly, Odysseus is driven by his desire to return to Ithaca, Penelope, and Telemachus. This gives his enormous adventure an emotional purpose. Every monster, storm, temptation, and battle becomes another obstacle between him and the people he loves. Penelope, played by Anne Hathaway, represents loyalty, patience, intelligence, and emotional strength. While Odysseus is physically traveling through dangerous lands and seas, Penelope is facing her own struggle at home. Her character is important because she demonstrates that courage does not always require physical combat. She must deal with uncertainty, pressure, and unwanted attention while maintaining hope that Odysseus will eventually return. Her relationship with Odysseus provides the emotional foundation of the story. Their separation makes Odysseus' journey more meaningful because he is not simply trying to survive, he is trying to return to the life he left behind. Telemachus, played by Holland, represents the theme of coming of age. He has grown up without his father and must deal with the consequences of Odysseus' absence. His character provides an interesting contrast with his father. While Odysseus is an experienced warrior who has traveled across the ancient world, Telemachus is a young man attempting to discover who he is and what kind of person he wants to become. His journey is therefore partly about finding his own identity. The absence of his father forces him to mature, make difficult decisions, and eventually step beyond the shadow of Odysseus. Athena, played by Zendaya, represents wisdom, strategy, guidance, and divine intervention. In Homer's epic, Athena has a special relationship with Odysseus because she admires his intelligence and resourcefulness. Her presence adds a supernatural dimension, to the story while also reinforcing one of its central ideas. Odysseus's greatest weapon is his mind. Athena's relationship with Odysseus is therefore more than that of a goddess helping a mortal. She becomes a reflection of the qualities that make him extraordinary. Antinous, Robert Pattinson. Antinous, played by Robert Pattinson, represents one of the major threats facing Odysseus's family and home. His character embodies arrogance, entitlement, aggression, and ambition. Unlike Odysseus, whose journey is motivated by his desire to return to his family, Antinous is driven by his own interests. His presence creates tension around Penelope and Ithaca and provides an important source of conflict. Robert Pattinson's casting also gives the character a potentially unpredictable quality, making him one of the more intriguing figures within the ensemble. Calypso, Charlize Theron. Calypso, played by Charlize Theron, represents one of the most important themes of Odysseus's journey: temptation. Calypso offers Odysseus an alternative to his difficult journey home. Her island can provide comfort, security, and pleasure, but accepting that life would mean abandoning his ultimate goal. This makes Calypso important symbolically. She represents the question of whether comfort is worth sacrificing freedom, family, and one's true purpose. Polyphemus, the legendary Cyclops, represents one of the most terrifying physical obstacles in Odysseus's journey. His encounter with Odysseus is not simply a battle between strength and strength. It becomes a test of Odysseus's intelligence and ability to survive when physical power is completely against him. The Cyclops also reinforces one of the movie's recurring ideas. Human intelligence can sometimes overcome forces that appear impossible to defeat. What makes the Odyssey interesting is that almost every major character represents a different aspect of the human experience. Odysseus represents perseverance and intelligence. Penelope represents loyalty. Telemachus represents growth. Athena represents wisdom. Antinous represents ambition and entitlement. And Calypso represents temptation. At the center of all these relationships is the concept of home. Odysseus's journey is not simply about traveling from one place to another. It is about discovering what home means after war, loss, temptation, and years of separation. Ultimately, Odysseus's greatest battle is not against monsters or armies, it is against the forces that prevent him from becoming the man capable of returning home. This combination of mythology, human emotion, and psychological conflict gives the characters in the Odyssey much greater significance than simply serving as heroes and villains in an adventure. Story: the supporting cast of the Odyssey 2026 is one of the film's biggest attractions, bringing together an unusually impressive group of internationally recognized actors. While Matt Damon as Odysseus remains at the center of the story, the supporting performers represent the different people, gods, rivals, and mythical forces that shape his extraordinary journey home. Tom Holland as Telemachus is one of the most important supporting performances. Telemachus is Odysseus' son, who has grown up while his father has been away fighting the Trojan War. His character gives the story a strong coming-of-age dimension as he struggles with his father's absence and gradually begins to establish his own identity. Holland's presence also adds a younger emotional perspective to a story, dominated by war, mythology, and older characters. Anne Hathaway as Penelope is another central supporting character. Penelope is Odysseus' wife and represents his strongest emotional connection to Ithaca. While Odysseus is traveling through dangerous lands, Penelope faces her own pressures at home. Hathaway's role therefore provides the film with an important balance between the physical adventure and the emotional consequences of Odysseus' long absence. Zendaya as Athena brings a supernatural and strategic dimension to the story. Athena is traditionally one of Odysseus' greatest divine supporters, admiring his intelligence and resourcefulness. Her presence connects the human world of Odysseus with the powerful world of Greek mythology and gives the protagonist an important source of guidance. Robert Pattinson as Antinous plays a very different kind of character. Antinous is one of the men competing for Penelope's attention while Odysseus remains away. His character introduces tension into the Ithacan storyline and represents the arrogance and entitlement that Odysseus must eventually confront when he returns home. The film also features Lupita Nyong'o, whose character adds another layer to the enormous ensemble. Her involvement demonstrates the scale of Nolan's casting strategy, in which even secondary characters are played by highly accomplished performers. Other notable members of the cast include John Leguizamo, Benny Safdie, John Bernthal, Elliot Page, Himesh Patel, Bill Irwin, Samantha Morton, and Mia Goth, among others. Their characters help populate Nolan's version of the ancient Mediterranean world with warriors, mythical figures, rivals, and inhabitants of the various locations Odysseus encounters. One of the most impressive aspects of the supporting cast is the variety of acting styles and personalities. Some characters are serious and emotionally driven, while others are mysterious, threatening, humorous, or supernatural. This variety helps prevent the long journey from becoming repetitive and allows each stage of Odysseus's adventure to have a different atmosphere. The ensemble also strengthens the film's mythological scale. Instead of making Odysseus's journey feel like a simple one-man adventure, the supporting characters constantly remind the audience that he is moving through a world filled with powerful human beings, gods, monsters, and competing forces. The supporting cast of the Odyssey is exceptionally strong, with Tom Holland, Anne Hathaway, Zendaya, Robert Pattinson, Charlize Theron, and Lupita Nyong'o adding major star power to the production. More importantly, these characters are essential to the story because they represent family, loyalty, temptation, rivalry, wisdom, ambition, and supernatural power. In short, the supporting cast does not merely surround Odysseus, they help define his journey. Each major character becomes another piece of the enormous emotional and mythological puzzle that Christopher Nolan is attempting to bring to the big screen. The Odyssey, 2026, features an extraordinary ensemble cast led by Matt Damon, with some of Hollywood's biggest stars taking on characters from Homer's legendary epic. Christopher Nolan has assembled a cast capable of handling both the enormous physical scale of the story and its emotional and dramatic demands. Matt Damon takes on the central role of Odysseus, the legendary king of Ithaca and the hero at the heart of the story. Damon brings experience from major historical and action films, making him a strong choice for a character who must combine intelligence, leadership, physical courage, and emotional vulnerability. His performance is expected to carry much of the movie because almost every major event is connected to Odysseus' struggle to return home. Anne Hathaway plays Penelope, Odysseus' wife and one of the most important figures in his life. Hathaway reunites with Nolan after their collaboration on The Dark Knight Rises and Interstellar. Her character represents loyalty, patience, and emotional strength, while her separation from Odysseus gives the story a powerful emotional dimension. Tom Holland portrays Telemachus, the son of Odysseus and Penelope. His character provides a strong coming-of-age element to the film. Telemachus has grown up without his father and must gradually discover his own strength and identity. Holland's youthful energy creates an interesting contrast with Damon's more experienced and battle-worn. Odysseus Zendaya takes on the role of Athena, the powerful Greek goddess associated with wisdom and strategic thinking. Athena's connection with Odysseus is particularly important because she recognizes his intelligence and frequently supports him. Zendaya's role therefore connects the human story with the supernatural world of Greek mythology. Robert Pattinson plays Antinous, one of the important figures opposing Odysseus's interest in Ithaca. Pattinson's ability to portray mysterious and morally complicated characters makes him an intriguing choice for a role associated with rivalry, ambition, and entitlement. Lupita Nyong'o is also part of the major ensemble, adding further star power and dramatic depth to the production. Her involvement is particularly significant because Nolan has surrounded the central characters with performers who have extensive experience in both large-scale productions and emotionally demanding roles. Charlize Theron portrays Calypso, the mysterious figure who becomes an important part of Odysseus's long journey. Calypso represents temptation and creates one of the most emotionally complicated obstacles between Odysseus and his ultimate goal of returning home. The main cast also includes several other highly respected performers, creating an ensemble that features a mixture of established Hollywood stars, acclaimed dramatic actors, and younger performers. This combination allows Nolan to give Homer's ancient characters a modern cinematic presence while maintaining the epic scale of the story. What makes this casting particularly exciting is that the actors are not simply chosen for their fame. Each performer brings qualities that correspond to the character they portray. Damon brings determination and intelligence to Odysseus. Hathaway brings emotional strength to Penelope. Holland brings youthful development to Telemachus. Zendaya brings authority and mystery to Athena, and Pattinson brings intensity to Antinous. Overall, the main cast is one of the film's greatest strengths, with Matt Damon leading an ensemble that includes Anne Hathaway, Tom Holland, Zendaya, Robert Pattinson, Lupita Nyong'o, and Charlize Theron. The Odyssey has the star power necessary to match the enormous scale of Christopher Nolan's adaptation. Hidden details and Easter eggs. The Odyssey 2026 contains several hidden details and Easter eggs that become much more meaningful when the film is watched a second time. Christopher Nolan uses visual symbolism, repeated sounds, character details, and references to both Homer's original epic and his own earlier films to add additional layers to the story. Some of these details are openly discussed by critics, while others are interpretations noticed by viewers. One of the most interesting details appears during the Trojan horse sequence. When a Trojan soldier suspects that Greek soldiers may be hiding inside the wooden horse, he drives his sword into it. The sword actually hits one of Odysseus's men, but another soldier quickly wipes the blood from the blade before it is removed. This tiny detail explains how the Greeks managed to remain undiscovered and makes the sequence feel much more tense. Another subtle detail concerns Odysseus's physical condition inside the Trojan horse. After spending so much time cramped inside the structure, he is visibly struggling when he climbs down and lands on the ground. His limp quietly communicates the physical suffering of the soldiers rather than presenting them as invincible warriors. The bowstring is another important recurring symbol. Earlier in the film, Odysseus plucks his bow before killing an animal because he considers it honorable to warn his prey. Much later, when he returns to Ithaca disguised as a beggar and finally strings his bow, the same distinctive sound becomes a signal. Penelope recognizes the sound, while Antinous immediately understands the danger. The same action, therefore, has completely different meanings at different points in the story. One of the film's biggest revelations involves Athena. What initially appears to be Zendaya's supernatural character can be interpreted differently after the final scenes. During Odysseus's confession to Penelope, the film connects the image of Athena with a flashback to the brutality of the Trojan War. A woman, resembling the earlier Athena, is shown among the innocent victims, suggesting that Athena may actually be a manifestation of Odysseus's guilt and trauma rather than a literal goddess. This interpretation completely changes the meaning of many earlier scenes. The film also contains several references to Nolan's previous movies. One particularly noticeable example is the golden Athena-shaped hairpin that Penelope gives Odysseus before he leaves for Troy. Some critics have interpreted the object as resembling the function of the spinning top in Inception. It becomes a personal object that connects the protagonist to the reality and life he desperately wants to return to. There is also a striking visual resemblance between Agamemnon's armor and Batman's suit from Nolan's The Dark Knight. The black armor, helmet, cape-like appearance, and imposing silhouette have led many viewers to interpret it as a deliberate, Nolan-style visual reference. Nolan has explained the black and bronze appearance in terms of displaying wealth and power, but the resemblance is certainly noticeable. Another interesting Easter egg is the film's use of Penelope's weaving. Her nightly unraveling of the cloth is a clever symbol of resistance against time. It has also been compared with Nolan's recurring fascination with time and attempts to manipulate it, particularly in Interstellar. In both stories, a seemingly simple domestic action becomes a way of resisting an approaching deadline. Nolan also incorporates material not directly taken from Homer's Odyssey. The detailed Trojan horse sequence, for example, draws partly on later traditions, particularly Virgil's Aeneid. The character Sinon, played by Elliot Page, is another addition, connected to Virgil's account of Troy, rather than Homer's Odyssey. These changes demonstrate that Nolan is adapting the wider mythology surrounding Odysseus rather than simply filming the poem word for word. The film's opening and ending are also connected through Odysseus's guilt. At first, the Trojan War can appear like a heroic victory, but later memories reveal the brutality and suffering behind that victory. This deliberately changes the audience's understanding of Odysseus. The man who once saw himself as a clever hero gradually has to confront the consequences of his actions. Overall, these Easter eggs show that the Odyssey is not simply a straightforward retelling of Homer's story. Nolan hides clues about guilt, identity, time, memory, mythology, and homecoming throughout the film. Some details are direct references to Homer and later Greek traditions, while others function as subtle, Nolan winks, connecting the film to his earlier work. The most important hidden detail is perhaps the simplest. The journey home changes the meaning of everything that happened before it. Once Odysseus finally confronts his past, earlier images, sounds, and characters, including Athena and the bowstring, take on entirely different meanings. The trailer for the Odyssey 2026 immediately establishes that Christopher Nolan is treating Homer's ancient epic as a massive cinematic event rather than a conventional fantasy adventure. The official trailer runs for roughly 2.5 minutes and gives audiences a much clearer look at Matt Damon's Odysseus, his family, his enemies, and the supernatural dangers awaiting him on his journey home. Universal's official trailer emphasizes that the film was shot across the world using new IMAX film technology, while the footage moves between intimate character moments and enormous action sequences. The trailer begins by establishing the aftermath of the Trojan War and Odysseus's desperate attempt to return to Ithaca. Rather than presenting him simply as a victorious warrior, the footage makes him appear exhausted and increasingly isolated. His journey has become a battle against circumstances that are far larger than himself, and the trailer repeatedly emphasizes the enormous distance between Odysseus and the home he desperately wants to reach. One of the most visually impressive sequences is the Trojan horse, which gives viewers a glimpse of the scale Nolan has brought to the ancient world. The trailer shows enormous numbers of soldiers and large practical environments, suggesting that the filmmakers wanted the famous event to feel like a real historical battle rather than a digitally constructed fantasy sequence. Universal specifically highlighted the Trojan horse footage as one of the major spectacles revealed in the new trailer. The trailer then shifts toward the emotional side of the story, particularly Odysseus' relationship with Penelope, played by Anne Hathaway, and Telemachus, played by Tom Holland. This is important because the heart of the Odyssey is not simply Odysseus surviving monsters. It is his determination to return to his family after years of absence. The newer trailer places considerably more emphasis on the family storyline than the earliest promotional footage did. Robert Pattinson's Antinous is also presented as a significant threat. The trailer shows him among the men occupying Odysseus' home and pressuring Penelope to accept that Odysseus is never coming back. His treatment of Telemachus makes the conflict much more personal, transforming the Ithacan storyline into a struggle over family, power, inheritance, and loyalty. Another major highlight is Charlize Theron's Calypso. Her scenes suggest that Odysseus' journey will not consist exclusively of physical battles. Calypso represents a different kind of danger, temptation. She can offer Odysseus comfort and an escape from his suffering, but accepting that alternative could mean abandoning his ultimate goal of returning home. The trailer, therefore, hints that some of Odysseus' hardest battles will be psychological, rather than physical. Universal, specifically, highlighted the exchange between Damon and Theron in its description of the new footage. The trailer also provides glimpses of the mythological creatures and supernatural dangers that Odysseus encounters. Rather than revealing every major creature, the marketing appears to deliberately preserve some mystery. This is typical of Nolan's promotional style. The trailers establish the atmosphere, scale, characters, and central conflict without completely explaining every major story development. Visually, the trailer is dominated by vast oceans, ancient landscapes, ships, enormous armies, dark caves, storms, and massive practical environments. The cinematography by Hoyt van Hoytema makes extensive use of the IMAX format, allowing the landscapes and battle sequences to occupy a huge portion of the frame. This is particularly significant because the Odyssey became the first film shot entirely with IMAX cameras, making the format itself an important part of the movie's identity. The sound design and music also contribute heavily to the trailer's intensity. Ludwig Göransson's score gradually builds tension as the images become more spectacular, creating the impression that Odysseus' journey is constantly moving towards something larger and more dangerous. The editing deliberately alternates between quiet dialogue and enormous action, creating a rhythm that makes the trailer feel both intimate and epic. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of the trailer is what it doesn't reveal. Instead of explaining every mythological encounter, the marketing focuses on the central question: will Odysseus survive everything standing between him and home? This keeps the story accessible even to viewers who already know Homer's epic while still leaving room for surprises. The trailer successfully presents The Odyssey is a combination of mythology, action, family drama, war, adventure, and psychological conflict. Matt Damon's Odysseus appears to be at the center of an enormous journey, while Anne Hathaway, Tom Holland, Robert Pattinson, Zendaya, and Charlize Theron represent the different emotional and mythological forces surrounding him. Most importantly, the trailer makes one thing clear. Nolan is not attempting to make a small-scale adaptation of Homer. He is turning the Odyssey into a gigantic theatrical spectacle, using real locations, practical filmmaking, enormous sets, and IMAX photography to make the ancient world feel tangible and overwhelming. The Odyssey 2026 is much more than a mythological adventure. Beneath its enormous battles, sea voyages, monsters, and spectacular landscapes, Christopher Nolan uses the story to explore homecoming, family, war, guilt, morality, identity, temptation, sacrifice, and the consequences of human choices. Nolan himself has described the story as a family story, a love story, a war story, a revenge story, and a coming-of-age story, which explains why the film operates on several emotional levels at once. The most important theme is homecoming. Odysseus spends years traveling through an increasingly dangerous world, but his ultimate objective remains Ithaca. Home is therefore not simply a geographical destination. It represents family, identity, belonging, and the possibility of returning to the person he once was. This makes the journey emotionally powerful. Odysseus can defeat enemies and survive monsters, but none of those victories matter if he cannot return to Penelope and Telemachus. Nolan's interpretation particularly emphasizes the emotional dimension of Odysseus's return and his relationship with his family. The film also examines the true cost of war. The Trojan War may initially appear to be a heroic military victory, but the consequences are much darker. Odysseus returns from war carrying experiences that cannot simply be forgotten. The movie therefore asks an important question. What happens to a person after winning a war? Victory does not necessarily bring peace. Instead, it can leave behind guilt, trauma, destruction, and moral consequences. Critics have particularly highlighted the film's interest in post-war disillusionment and the human cost of conflict. One of the film's strongest themes is guilt. Odysseus is an intelligent and successful warrior, but his intelligence is sometimes used for deception and destruction. His famous Trojan horse strategy brings victory, yet it also becomes a symbol of the moral consequences of his actions. This creates an important contrast. A man can win a war and still lose part of himself in the process. The film therefore challenges the traditional image of Odysseus as an uncomplicated, heroic figure and presents him as a flawed man forced to confront the consequences of his decisions. Family provides the emotional heart of the story. Odysseus's relationship with Penelope and Telemachus gives his journey a purpose beyond survival. Penelope symbolizes loyalty and endurance, while Telemachus represents the passage of time and the consequences of absence. Odysseus has been away for so long that his son has grown into a different person. His return, therefore, raises a difficult question. Can someone truly return to the life they left behind? Nolan has specifically described his version of the Odyssey as a more mature love story, focusing on the perspective of a middle-aged man looking back at love, loss, and family. Calypso represents one of the clearest symbols of temptation. She offers Odysseus an alternative to his painful journey: comfort, security, and an escape from responsibility. But accepting that comfort would mean abandoning his purpose. Through Calypso, the film asks whether a peaceful life without the people we love is really happiness. Odysseus repeatedly has to choose between what is easy and what is meaningful. Odysseus is not the strongest warrior in the Greek world. His greatest weapon is his mind. Again and again, he survives situations through strategy, deception, patience, and psychological manipulation. This creates a central contrast between brute force and intelligence. However, Nolan also complicates this idea. Intelligence can create enormous achievements, but when intelligence is used without moral restraint, it can also produce destruction. Time is another important Nolan theme. The original Odyssey itself uses a remarkably sophisticated structure, with stories within stories and flashbacks within flashbacks. Nolan has said that he was excited by how the ancient poem's structure resembled the non-linear storytelling he has explored throughout his career. The Guardian. Time therefore becomes more than a storytelling technique. It represents everything Odysseus has lost while he has been away. Years pass, his son grows older, his marriage changes, and the world he remembers may no longer exist in exactly the same form. The sea functions as one of the film's most powerful symbols. It separates Odysseus from home and repeatedly places him in situations he cannot completely control. At the same time, the sea represents uncertainty and transformation. Every time Odysseus enters it, he leaves behind one stage of his journey and enters another. In this sense, the sea is almost like a physical representation of life itself. Unpredictable, dangerous, beautiful, and impossible to completely control. Perhaps the most interesting, symbolic decision is Nolan's treatment of the Greek gods. Unlike Homer's poem, where divine figures play a much more active role, the film makes the mythology considerably more human and psychological. Critics have noted that the gods are largely absent, with Athena being the major divine presence. This changes the meaning of the story. Instead of simply blaming supernatural beings for human suffering, the film encourages audiences to consider human responsibility. Are Odysseus's problems caused by the gods, or are they partly consequences of his own choices? That ambiguity makes the story more psychologically complex. Ultimately, almost everything in the Odyssey points back to the same central idea. The journey changes the person who makes it. The sea represents uncertainty. Ithaca represents home and identity. Calypso represents temptation. The Trojan horse represents intelligence mixed with deception. The war represents the consequences of violence. And Odysseus himself represents a flawed human being, struggling to reconcile the man he was with, the man he has become. That is what makes Nolan's adaptation particularly interesting. It is not simply asking, will Odysseus get home? It is asking a much deeper question. After everything he has done and everything he has lost, what kind of man will finally arrive there? The official trailer for the Odyssey generated enormous interest immediately after its release. According to entertainment analytics firm Wave Metrics, the first major trailer accumulated approximately 21.4 million views across social media platforms, within its first 24 hours, making it one of the most watched movie trailers of 2025. That figure was more than double the first 24-hour performance reported for Nolan's Oppenheimer, demonstrating the extraordinary anticipation surrounding Nolan's return to the big screen. The trailer's performance on YouTube was also extremely strong. Universal Pictures' official trailer has surpassed 48 million views on its official YouTube upload, while the newer official trailer has accumulated nearly 30 million views. These figures show that interest remained high even after the initial promotional campaign. However, the public response was surprisingly divided. Many viewers were excited by the enormous scale, Christopher Nolan's reputation, the star-studded cast, and the promise of a modern adaptation of Homer's The Odyssey. The combination of Matt Damon, Tom Holland, Anne Hathaway, Zendaya, Robert Pattinson, and Charlize Theron generated considerable discussion online, while the IMAX cinematography became another major attraction. At the same time, some viewers criticized the trailer for being too restrained and less spectacular than they expected. From a Nolan epic, online discussions frequently complained that the footage did not reveal enough of the film's fantastical elements and that the trailer felt more grounded and serious than the mythological adventure many people had imagined. Some viewers also questioned the dialogue, accents, casting choices, and historical appearance of the costumes and ships. There was also an unusual backlash surrounding the latest promotional trailer, with third-party dislike tracking sites reporting hundreds of thousands of dislikes. Some Pakistani media reports cited more than 600,000 dislikes against roughly 68,000 likes for one trailer upload. However, these figures should be treated cautiously because YouTube no longer publicly displays dislike counts, meaning such numbers come from third-party estimates rather than official YouTube statistics. Interestingly, the reaction changed significantly after audiences actually saw the finished movie. Early reactions from people who attended screenings were considerably more positive than some of the online trailer criticism. Critics praised the film's scale, filmmaking, performances, and ambition, creating an interesting contrast between the negative reaction from some trailer viewers and the stronger response from people who had experienced the complete film. Overall, the trailer campaign was commercially extremely successful but culturally divisive. Its huge view counts demonstrated enormous curiosity, while the criticism showed that audiences had very specific expectations for what a Christopher Nolan adaptation of the Odyssey should look like. In the end, the controversy itself helped keep the movie in public conversation and contributed to the enormous attention surrounding its theatrical release. In short, the trailer attracted hundreds of millions of views across platforms, generated intense online discussion, and received both enthusiastic praise and substantial criticism. The most interesting part of the response was the contrast between people who disliked what the trailers appeared to promise and audiences and critics who became much more positive after actually watching the finished film. The making of the Odyssey, 2026, was almost as extraordinary as the story itself. Christopher Nolan approached the production with an unusually strong commitment to physical filmmaking, real locations, practical environments, and large-format cinematography. Rather than creating the ancient world almost entirely inside a studio, the production traveled across 6 countries: the United States, Greece, Italy, Morocco, Iceland, and Scotland, to give the actors and audience a genuine sense of the enormous journey. Nolan said that moving between countries every few weeks created a momentum that suited a film literally called the Odyssey. One of the biggest technical achievements is that the Odyssey became the first feature film shot entirely with IMAX film cameras. Nolan had previously used IMAX extensively for action sequences, but for this movie he wanted to use the format even for intimate dialogue and emotional scenes. Because traditional IMAX cameras were too loud for synchronized dialogue, Nolan and IMAX developed a new, quieter camera system known as the Keeley camera. Its specially designed sound enclosure reduced the camera noise enough to make close-up, dramatic scenes possible. The production consumed an astonishing 2.1 million feet of IMAX film. Because IMAX film magazines could only hold approximately 2.5 to 3 minutes of footage, the crew had to reload the camera repeatedly during production, instead of allowing the actors to completely break character whenever the film ran out. Nolan developed a system in which everyone would remain still and silent during magazine changes, and then immediately continue the scene. The entire shoot lasted 91 days and was completed 9 days, ahead of the planned schedule. Nolan had originally planned around 100 shooting days, but favorable weather and other production conditions allowed the team to finish earlier. Nolan has explained that after around 100 days, a production can become increasingly exhausting, so completing the film in 91 days was a significant achievement. One of the most fascinating details concerns the Greek ship used in the film. Rather than creating the main vessel entirely through CGI, the production used the Draken, a real reconstruction of a Viking ship. The vessel was modified to make it visually appropriate for the Mycenaean world of the film. The actors actually learned to row and sail, while members of the ship's real crew were incorporated into the movie as extras. Nolan even described filming aboard the ship almost like making a documentary, because the real environment produced details that would have been impossible to discover on a soundstage. The production also made enormous use of real locations. Troy was constructed in Morocco. The Cyclops cave was filmed in Greece. Iceland's black sand landscapes were used for Hades, and Favignana in Sicily represented Ithaca. Some members of the cast and crew reportedly had to hike around 45 minutes each day to reach a castle location on Favignana that sits roughly 314 meters above sea level. The filmmakers also tried to make the mythical creatures feel like characters rather than simple visual effects creations. Nolan has explained that he was particularly influenced by filmmaker Guillermo del Toro's approach to monsters. For the Cyclops Polyphemus, played by Bill Irwin, the production combined performance, animatronics, puppetry, and visual effects. The creature's visual design was strongly inspired by Francisco Goya's painting Saturn Devouring His Son, which was kept as a reference during the design process. Another fascinating fact is that the production was enormous even from the actors' perspective. Tom Holland reportedly described arriving at the Moroccan set and seeing what appeared to be miles of Greek soldiers, boats, costumes, and battlefield elements. Instead of looking like a conventional film set, it reportedly felt more like an enormous historical reenactment. The physical demands were also substantial. Damon described the locations as some of the hardest locations he had ever worked in, and they came one after another. The cast had to deal with demanding terrain, boats, weather, remote locations, and extensive physical preparation. Himesh Patel, who plays Eurylochus, has also discussed how physically demanding the shoot was and how the experience required significant preparation from the performers. Finally, the production had an estimated budget of around $250 million, making it one of the most expensive projects of Nolan's career. The enormous budget was not simply spent on digital spectacle. A significant part of the filmmaking philosophy was about putting real people, real ships, real landscapes, enormous sets, and practical environments in front of the camera. Production designer Ruth de Jong described bringing the 2,800-year-old epic to life as an extraordinarily difficult undertaking. Overall, the behind-the-scenes story of the Odyssey demonstrates why the movie feels so physically enormous. Nolan did not merely film a story about an epic journey. He turned the production itself into an odyssey, moving cast and crew across continents, sailing real ships, developing new IMAX technology, building huge practical sets, and shooting more than 2 million feet of IMAX film to create a world that audiences could genuinely feel they were entering. The Odyssey, 2026, was produced on an estimated budget of around $250 million, making it one of the most expensive films of Christopher Nolan's career. The huge budget was largely required because of the movie's extensive international filming, enormous practical sets, large ensemble cast, real ships, complex action sequences, and Nolan's decision to shoot the entire film using IMAX film cameras. Rather than depending entirely on computer-generated imagery, the production invested heavily in real locations, practical effects, physical environments, costumes, props, and large-scale sets to create a convincing ancient world. The movie also performed exceptionally well at the global box office. It opened with approximately $123.5 million in the domestic market during its opening weekend, demonstrating the enormous anticipation surrounding Nolan's adaptation of Homer's epic. As its theatrical run progressed, the film attracted audiences from both North America and international markets, with particularly strong interest in major overseas territories. Its combination of Christopher Nolan's reputation, a star-studded cast, the popularity of Homer's story, and the promise of an enormous IMAX experience helped the movie become a major, worldwide theatrical success. According to the latest reported figures, The Odyssey has earned approximately $1.36 billion worldwide, including around $524.6 million from the domestic market and approximately $835.6 million internationally. These figures represent a remarkable commercial achievement, considering that the movie is an R-rated epic with a long run time and is not based on a modern superhero or established blockbuster franchise. The film's performance demonstrates the continuing strength of theatrical cinema when audiences are offered an ambitious, visually spectacular experience designed specifically for the big screen. With a production budget of roughly $250 million and worldwide earnings of around $136 billion, The Odyssey became one of the biggest box office successes of 2026. Its commercial performance also strengthened Christopher Nolan's position as one of the few contemporary filmmakers capable of attracting enormous global audiences with original, director-driven theatrical projects. The movie ultimately proved that an ancient, literary epic could be transformed into a modern blockbuster while maintaining the scale, ambition, and cinematic identity that audiences expect from a Christopher Nolan production. The best scenes in The Odyssey, 2026, are the moments where Christopher Nolan combines Homer's mythology with emotional drama and large-scale filmmaking. One of the most memorable sequences is the Trojan horse scene, where Odysseus and his Greek soldiers hide inside the enormous wooden horse before entering Troy. The scene is not presented simply as a military trick. It establishes Odysseus as a brilliant strategist, while also showing the brutality and moral complexity of war. The tension becomes intense when the Trojan soldiers inspect the horse, creating a situation where even the smallest sound or movement could expose the Greeks. Another major highlight is the Cyclops sequence involving Polyphemus. Odysseus and his men become trapped inside the creature's cave, and the enormous difference in size between the human characters and the Cyclops creates a terrifying atmosphere. Instead of attempting to defeat Polyphemus through physical strength, Odysseus relies on intelligence and deception. This scene perfectly represents one of the central characteristics of his personality. When physical power fails, his greatest weapon is his ability to think several steps ahead. The sea sequences are also among the film's most visually impressive moments. Odysseus and his crew face enormous waves, violent storms, and unpredictable dangers while traveling across the Mediterranean. Nolan uses the vastness of the ocean to make the characters appear extremely small and vulnerable. These scenes are not simply action sequences. The sea becomes a symbol of uncertainty, showing how little control Odysseus has over his own fate. The scenes involving Calypso, played by Charlize Theron, provide a completely different kind of conflict. Instead of fighting Odysseus physically, Calypso represents temptation. She offers him the possibility of abandoning his painful journey and remaining in a place where he can escape many of his responsibilities. These scenes are important because they reveal that Odysseus's greatest challenges are not always monsters or armies. Sometimes the hardest decision is choosing between temporary comfort and the people and responsibilities that truly matter to him. Another emotionally powerful section focuses on Penelope and Telemachus in Ithaca. While Odysseus is traveling through dangerous environments, his family is dealing with the consequences of his absence. Telemachus has grown up without his father, while Penelope must remain loyal despite enormous uncertainty. These scenes give the movie an emotional balance because they remind the audience that Odysseus' journey affects people who are waiting for him at home. The return to Ithaca is arguably the most satisfying part of the film. Odysseus does not simply return as the powerful king who left years earlier. He comes back as a man transformed by war, loss, temptation, and suffering. His decision to disguise himself before confronting the situation in his own palace creates suspense because the audience knows his true identity while many of the characters around him do not. The bow sequence is another memorable moment. Odysseus' ability to use his famous bow becomes a symbol of his identity and authority. The moment he successfully demonstrates his mastery of the weapon signals that the lost king has finally returned. The scene combines action with recognition. Because the bow is not merely a weapon, it is a connection between the man Odysseus was and the man he has become. Finally, the reunion with Penelope provides the emotional payoff for the entire journey. After years of separation, Odysseus finally reaches the person and place he has been fighting to return to. The scene is deliberately more emotional than spectacular, allowing the human meaning of the journey to take priority over the mythology. After everything Odysseus has experienced, home is no longer simply a location. It represents forgiveness, belonging, family, and the possibility of beginning again. Overall, the best scenes in the Odyssey work because they are not merely designed to impress the audience visually. The Trojan horse represents strategy and the consequences of war. The Cyclops represents the triumph of intelligence over physical strength. The sea represents uncertainty. Calypso represents temptation. And Ithaca represents home and identity. Together, these moments transform Odysseus' adventure into a much deeper story about what a person must endure before finally finding his way back home after an extraordinary journey filled with war, monsters, storms, temptation, loss, and personal sacrifice. The Odyssey 2026 ultimately brings Odysseus back to the place he has been longing for throughout the entire story, Ithaca. However, his return is not simply a victory over his enemies. It represents the completion of a deeply personal transformation. Odysseus begins his journey as a proud and confident warrior who believes that intelligence and courage can overcome almost anything. But years of suffering force him to confront the consequences of his choices and the people he has lost along the way. When he finally reunites with Penelope and Telemachus, the emotional significance of home becomes clearer than ever. The film suggests that true victory is not conquering enemies or surviving impossible adventures, but finding the courage to return to the people who give life its meaning. Christopher. Nolan's adaptation therefore ends not merely as a mythological adventure, but as a powerful reflection on love, family, sacrifice, guilt, perseverance, and the timeless human desire to find our way home.